Oh yeah, someone powerful is watching you. Not powerful in the way movies dramatize it. Not powerful with titles, or authority, or control over your life. Powerful in a quieter, more uncomfortable way. Powerful because they feel you now. Because something about you shifted, and they don't understand how or why. Not just watching either. Obsessed, jealous, and you don't even notice, because you're no longer performing for an audience that needs you small. You're just existing, and that's what did it. See, you think nothing happened. You think you just got tired. Tired of explaining, tired of reacting, tired of trying to be understood by people who were never listening anyway. You think you just went quiet, pulled back, chose peace, but from the outside, from the perspective of people who were used to having access to you, that wasn't peace. That was a disruption. Because silence from someone who used to give, explain, adjust, and absorb is not silence at all. It's a boundary appearing where none existed before. And boundaries do something fascinating to people who relied on your openness. They don't make them angry first, they make them uneasy. That's the part no one tells you. Anger comes later. Jealousy comes later. Obsession comes later. First comes confusion. They replay conversations in their head. They reread old messages. They notice you don't ask the same questions anymore. You don't react the same way. You don't lean in when they pull away. You don't chase clarity. You don't seek reassurance. And that absence, that calm, it does something to them. Because you were predictable once. Not boring. Predictable. Reliable. Emotionally available. Readable. They could tell when they mattered to you. They could tell when they disappointed you. They could tell how to pull a reaction out of you, if they needed one. And now, they can't read you at all. You didn't become cold. You became contained. And people confuse the two when they've benefited from your overflow. Here's the part you probably haven't realized yet. The jealousy didn't start because you succeeded. It didn't start because you won. It didn't start because you became louder or more visible. It started because you stopped leaking. You stopped spilling your inner world everywhere. Stopped narrating your thoughts. Stopped processing out loud. Stopped offering emotional access without consent. And when that happened, something inverted. You became the mirror. The same people who once felt powerful around you started feeling exposed. Because when you don't react, their behavior echoes louder. When you don't explain, their assumptions reveal themselves. When you don't defend, their accusations hang awkwardly in the air with no resistance to land on. That's not weakness. That's emotional gravity. And gravity doesn't chase, it pulls. They feel drawn to you now in ways they can't articulate. They watch how you move differently, how you pause before speaking, or don't speak at all. How you don't rush to fill silence anymore. How you let moments end unfinished. That unsettles people who built their sense of importance on your engagement. And yes, that creates jealousy. But not the loud kind, not the obvious kind, the quiet kind. The kind where someone starts comparing themselves to a version of you that doesn't even exist anymore. The kind where they feel behind without knowing what race they're running. The kind where your calm makes their inner noise unbearable. They won't say it out loud. They'll call you distant, different, changed. Hard to read, but underneath those words is something raw. You moved beyond them without announcing it. And nothing bruises the ego like realizing you're no longer the reference point. What's fascinating is that you didn't try to do this. You didn't plan a transformation. You didn't plot a reinvention. You just got honest with yourself. Honest about what drained you. Honest about what felt forced. Honest about how much of your energy was being spent managing other people's comfort. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. That's the moment everything shifted. Because awareness is not loud, it's irreversible. You stopped engaging with narratives that required you to stay confused. Stopped participating in emotional tug of war. Stopped mistaking intensity for connection. And people noticed. They noticed because your absence from old patterns created a vacuum. And vacuums pull attention whether you want them to or not. That's the watching. You feel sometimes. Not eyes on you. Attention on the space you left behind. The conversations that don't happen the same way anymore. The roles you quietly stepped out of. The emotional labor that suddenly went unpaid. Someone powerful is watching you because they lost leverage. Not over your life, but over your availability. And availability is the currency most people don't realize they've been spending. You used to be reachable in ways that cost you something. Now you're reachable only where it's aligned. That distinction changes everything. It turns admiration into comparison, comfort into insecurity, familiarity into fixation. And the wild part, you're not even doing anything. You're not broadcasting. You're not flexing. You're not trying to be mysterious. You're just no longer explaining yourself into exhaustion. That's why the jealousy feels irrational to them, because there's nothing concrete to point at. No achievement to resent, no spotlight to blame, just a presence that feels different, more grounded, more self-contained, less needy. And that threatens identities built on being needed. They'll test it, subtly. They'll say things that used to hook you. Bring up old dynamics, try to provoke the version of you they remember. And when it doesn't work, when you respond calmly, or not at all, that's when the watching turns into fixation, because they're trying to locate themselves in relation to you again. And they can't. You didn't rise above them. You stepped out of the comparison entirely. That's the move no one prepares for. Power isn't dominance. It's non-reactivity paired with self-trust. And jealousy is just the discomfort of someone realizing they can no longer access you the way they once did. You'll notice it in small ways. The questions that feel slightly intrusive. The comments that sound like concern but carry an edge. The way they bring up how you used to be. That's nostalgia mixed with loss. Because the old version of you was easier to place. Easier to influence, easier to read. This version has depth without disclosure, presence without performance. And that's rare. You're not hiding. You're just not volunteering. And people who are used to taking without asking feel unsettled by that shift. So yes, Simone powerful is watching you. Powerful in the sense that their attention is fixed. Their thoughts keep circling back. Their sense of self keeps recalibrating around your absence from old roles. And you're just living. That's the irony. You didn't become intimidating. You became unreadable by healing. And this is only the beginning, because the longer you stay aligned, the more obvious it becomes who was feeding on access, and who was never meant to come with you past this point. But we're not there yet, because once you understand why the watching started, you'll start noticing something else entirely, and that's when the dynamic really changes. Good. Now stay with me, because once you understand why the watching started, you begin to notice the second shift, the quieter one, the one that happens inside you, not around you. At some point, you realize something almost unsettling in its simplicity. Their attention doesn't actually reach you anymore. They're watching from the outside of a door you closed without slamming. No drama. No, just a quiet click. And that's when the power dynamic finishes flipping. See, earlier, the attention felt heavy. Like pressure, like being noticed without consent. Like someone leaning too close to your internal world. But now it feels distant, muted. Almost irrelevant. Because your center moved, you stopped orbiting reactions, stopped calibrating yourself based on how things would be received. stopped adjusting your tone, your timing, your truth to avoid discomfort, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. You realize something fundamental. Most people don't want honesty. They want predictability. They don't want depth. They want access. They don't want growth. They want continuity. And you broke continuity, not loudly, not rebelliously. You just stopped reinforcing it. That's why the jealousy sharpened. Because when someone can no longer locate themselves through you, they are forced to confront themselves directly, and that's uncomfortable. So they watch to see if this version of you is temporary, if it's a phase, if you'll soften back into familiarity. They watch for cracks, for emotional leaks, for moments where you revert. But here's the part that changes everything. You're not holding yourself together anymore. You're integrated. There's no split between who you are alone and who you are around others. No emotional mask to slip. No performance to maintain. And people who live in fragments can't understand that. They mistake integration for arrogance, boundaries for coldness, self-trust for ego. Because they've never felt what it's like to stand without internal negotiation. You have. That's why their attention feels static now, stuck. They're observing a moving thing from a fixed position, trying to understand motion without moving themselves. And it doesn't work. You'll notice how the jealousy starts to change tone. It becomes quieter, more resigned, less about you, more about them. They stop asking questions and start making assumptions. They stop reaching out and start narrating. They stop engaging and start interpreting from a distance. That's the moment you become symbolic to them. Not a person anymore. A reference point. Oh. What if, and that's when you're truly free. Because once someone turns you into a symbol, they've already lost access to your reality. You don't correct them. You don't clarify. You don't defend. Not because you don't care, but because there's nothing left to prove. Your peace isn't fragile. It doesn't need agreement to exist. And here's something subtle but important. The jealousy doesn't actually want you to fail. It wants you to explain. Because explanation would reopen the door. Explanation would make you reachable again. Explanation would restore the old dynamic where your inner world was a shared space. And you're not doing that anymore. You learned that being understood by everyone costs you yourself. So you chose precision over popularity, alignment over approval. That choice rewired how you move. You speak less, but more honestly. You listen without absorbing. You engage without overextending. And people feel that difference, even if they can't articulate it. They feel it in conversations that end sooner, in texts that don't spiral, in moments where you don't rush to fill silence. That's when the watching becomes passive. They're no longer trying to influence you. They're trying to understand what changed. But change doesn't explain itself. It just continues. You'll start to notice something else now too. The way new people respond to you. They don't push. They don't test. They don't demand emotional proof. They meet you where you are, because the version of you that tolerated misalignment is gone. And what remains sets a different tone without saying a word. This is where discernment replaces vigilance. You're not scanning for threats. You're not bracing for disappointment. You're simply paying attention. And attention, calm, grounded attention, is the most accurate filter there is. You notice who respects your pace, who doesn't rush intimacy, who doesn't pry, and without effort, your environment begins to reflect your inner order. That's when it fully clicks. The watching was never about control. It was about access. And access expired. Not because you revoked it aggressively, but because you outgrew the terms. This is what happens when you stop making yourself digestible, when you stop translating your depth into something easier to consume. People who were never meant to meet you at this level fall away naturally. No conflict required. And yes, some of them will always watch from a distance, curious, conflicted, a little envious. But they're no longer relevant to your movement. You're not moving against anything anymore. You're moving from yourself, and that changes the entire trajectory. Here's the quiet truth most people never hear. Being watched loses its power the moment you stop performing, and you stopped a long time ago. You're not hiding. You're not guarded. You're just whole. And wholeness is unreadable to people who depend on fragments. So let them watch. Let them wonder how you became so steady, so unbothered, so uninterested in proving anything. Because you know now, the attention was never a threat. It was confirmation that something in you stabilized, while something in them didn't. And you're not responsible for carrying that imbalance anymore. You chose peace. You chose alignment. You chose yourself without announcement. And this calm, grounded presence you're standing in now. This isn't the end of the shift. It's the foundation. Because once you stop being accessible to distortion, everything else rearranges itself around you. And that's where the real story continues.